The Great Hall of the Galactic Concord was the largest structure ever built by intelligent life. It floated in the empty space between three ancient stars, and its walls were made of crystal that had been grown over 10,000 years. Inside this hall, representatives from 400 species gathered to conduct the business of civilization. Ambassador stood at the entrance and tried not to feel small. She was 53 years old, with gray streaks in her dark hair and lines around her eyes from decades of difficult negotiations. She had represented humanity in border disputes, trade agreements, and first contact situations, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. Today, humanity would officially join the Galactic Concord. The hall was filled with beings that human imagination. They were tall and thin, with skin like wet stone and eyes that glowed with soft blue light. They had no solid bodies at all. They were creatures of living crystal that sang when they moved. The hegemony sent their warrior priests, massive creatures with 4 arms and mandibles that could crush steel. And there were hundreds more, beings of gas and light, of metal and flesh, of shapes that hurt to look at directly. All of them watched as the small human woman walked to the speaking platform. High Arbiter has presided over the assembly. He was ancient even by the standards of his long-lived species, and his carapace was covered in the ceremonial scars of 1,000 political battles. He looked down with compound eyes that showed no emotion. The species known as humanity petitions for membership in the Galactic Concord, he announced. His voice translated by machines into sounds could understand. They have met the requirements of faster-than-light travel, unified planetary government, and peaceful first contact. Does any member object? Silence, not because the members approved knew, because humanity was so insignificant that no one cared enough to object. They were a young species from a small planet in an unfashionable arm of the galaxy. Their technology was primitive. Their military was laughable. Their culture was barely 10,000 years old. To the ancient powers of the Concord, humans were children playing at civilization. Very well, has continued. By Concord tradition, the new member must now declare their absolute law. This is the one act which, if committed against your species, will result in total war without negotiation or compromise. The Concord recognizes the right of every species to hold one thing sacred above all others. Had studied the other species' declarations. They had declared their spawning pools sacred, the underground lakes where their young developed over centuries. Anyone who polluted or damaged these pools would face the full wrath of the fleets. They forbade the harvesting of their crystal cores, the heart stones that gave them consciousness. The hegemony demanded absolute respect for their god-emperor, whose existence had never been proven but whose worship was required. These were the things that would trigger apocalyptic war: territory, resources, religious symbols, biological necessities. Stepped up to the speaking platform. Every eye, sensor, and perception organ in the hall turned toward her. Humanity declares its absolute law, she said, her voice steady. Protect our children. For a long moment, there was confusion. The translator machines worked overtime, trying to convey the concept to species that reproduced in wildly different ways. Then the laughter started. It began with their mandibles clicking in the pattern that indicated amusement. It spread to whose stone bodies rumbled with humor. Even the chimed in discordant notes of mockery. High Arbiter has raised one massive claw for silence. Ambassador, perhaps there has been a translation error. You claim your species will go to total war over juveniles. Children, corrected. Young humans from birth until they reach maturity. But every species has young. This is simply biology. What makes human juveniles worthy of an absolute law? Had expected this question. She had prepared speeches about evolutionary psychology, about the long helplessness of human infants, about the deep biological programming that made humans protect their young with irrational ferocity. But looking at the mocking faces around her, she realized that explanations would be pointless. These beings would never understand. They could only be warned. "I will not explain," she said. "I will only make our position clear. If any species for any reason deliberately harms a human child, there will be consequences. Not proportional consequences. Not negotiated consequences. Total consequences." Has leaned forward, his compound eyes glittering. "You threaten total war over creatures that are, by your own biology, replaceable. Humans breed quickly, Ambassador. You could produce more juveniles within a single year. Why would you sacrifice your entire species over something so easily replaced?" Felt a cold anger building in her chest, but she kept her face calm. "Children are not replaceable. Biologically speaking." "I did not say biologically. I said children are not replaceable. Each one is unique. Each one is precious beyond calculation. Each one is protected by every adult human who has ever lived or ever will live." The mockery in the hall was shifting to something else now. Confusion, perhaps, or the beginning of unease. "This seems excessive," Has said. "Emotional, inefficient." "Yes," agreed. "It is all of those things. It is also non-negotiable. And if a human child is harmed by accident, by natural disaster, by illness, then we grieve and we heal and we continue. But if a human child is harmed deliberately, taken, hurt, killed by another species," paused, "there will be no negotiation. There will be no proportional response. There will be no terms of surrender. We will come for whoever is responsible, and we will not stop until they no longer exist." The laughter had died completely now. The hall was silent. "Ambassador," Has said slowly, "the Conquered has protocols for disputes, mediation, arbitration, proportional military response when necessary. You cannot simply declare that you will ignore all of these over juvenile organisms." "We are not asking permission," said. "We are giving warning. This is humanity's absolute law. It cannot be changed. It cannot be negotiated. It cannot be reasoned with. We are telling you now clearly so that no one can claim they did not know." She looked around the hall, meeting as many eyes as she could. "Remember this moment," she said. "Remember that we warned you. Remember that we told you exactly what would happen. And if the day ever comes when someone tests our law, remember that we gave you every chance to prevent it." High Arbiter was quiet for a long moment. Then he clicked his mandibles in a gesture that might have been dismissal. "Very well, humanity's absolute law is recorded. Protect their children." He made a sound that the translator rendered as a sigh. "We move on to trade agreements." And just like that, humanity's warning was filed away and forgotten. A strange declaration from a strange young species, too sentimental for the harsh realities of galactic civilization. The elder races had more important things to worry about. Ambassador returned to her seat and watched the proceedings continue. She felt no disappointment at the dismissive response. She had not expected understanding. She had not expected respect. She had expected exactly what she got: laughter, dismissal, and the assumption that humans were too weak and too emotional to be taken seriously. That was fine. When the day came, and knew in her bones that the day would come, no one would be able to say they had not been warned. The Conquered's records would show that humanity had declared its absolute law clearly and publicly. Whatever happened after that would not be humanity's fault. 60 years would pass before anyone tested the warning. When they did, the galaxy would learn that humans had not been exaggerating. They had been understating. Elysium IV was a beautiful world. It had blue skies, green forests, and oceans that sparkled under twin suns. The colony there was small, just 12,000 people who had left Earth and the crowded core worlds to build something new. They were farmers and teachers, engineers and shopkeepers, simple people living simple lives on the edge of human space. The colony's school sat on a hill overlooking the main settlement. It was a cheerful building with bright colors and large windows, surrounded by playing fields where children ran and laughed during breaks. 300 students attended, ranging from 4 years old to 16. Their parents dropped them off each morning with kisses and waves, confident that their children were safe. No one noticed the ships that entered the system 3 days before the attack. They were running dark, without identification signals, hiding behind the system's outer planets. The ships belonged to the ETH consortium, and they had come for cargo. Commander stood on the bridge of his flagship and studied the scans of the human colony. He was ETH, a reptilian species with scales the color of dried blood and eyes like yellow fire. His people had built their empire on the slave trade. For 3,000 years, they had raided younger species and sold their captives across the galaxy. The Galactic Concord officially condemned slavery. In practice, they did nothing to stop it. The consortium paid generous bribes, and the elder races found it convenient to look away. After all, the victims were always from weak species who could not defend themselves. "The human settlement is undefended," his second officer reported. 2 orbital platforms with light weapons, no military vessels in the system, ground defenses are minimal. Hissed with satisfaction, and the school. 300 juvenile humans, ages 4 through 16 standard years, healthy, well-fed, intelligent. The officer paused. "They will fetch excellent prices. Human juveniles are rare on the markets. Their long and adaptable biology make them valuable." "What of their absolute law?" another officer asked nervously. "The humans declared that harming their young would trigger total war." Laughed a harsh sound like rocks grinding together. "Total war, from humans, their military is pathetic. 300 combat vessels in their entire fleet. We have twice that many in this system alone." He waved a clawed hand dismissively. "The humans made threats they cannot back up. They are emotional creatures. They will protest, they will complain to the conquered, and then they will do nothing, because they can do nothing." He gave the order to attack. The raid happened during the middle of the school day. The children were in their classrooms, learning mathematics and history and science. The teachers were explaining, encouraging, guiding. Outside, the sky was clear and beautiful. Then the ships descended. They came down fast, breaking through the atmosphere with a scream of tortured air. They landed around the school in a precise formation, and before anyone could react, the troops were moving. ETH soldiers in combat armor, carrying weapons that could kill from 100 meters. The school's alarm began to wail. Teachers rushed to protect their students, moving children toward safe rooms that had been built for emergencies. But the safe rooms were designed for natural disasters, not military assault. The doors that would hold against storms and earthquakes lasted less than 30 seconds against consortium breaching charges. 11 teachers died that day. They died with their bodies between the soldiers and the children. They died fighting with their bare hands against armored warriors. They died because they refused to step aside, refused to let the children be taken without resistance. Sarah was a first-grade teacher, 62 years old, grandmother of 4. She killed 2 ETH soldiers with a fire extinguisher before they shot her down. James was a physical education instructor, 28 years old. He broke a soldier's arm and cracked another's faceplate before they overwhelmed him. Maria Santos was the school principal, 55 years old. She stood in the main hallway and refused to move until they killed her. 11 teachers, not soldiers, not warriors, teachers, and they fought like lions defending their cubs. It was not enough. It was never going to be enough. The soldiers moved through the school with brutal efficiency. They used gas to knock the children unconscious, then carried them to the waiting transports. 283 children, sleeping peacefully, unaware of what was happening to them. 17 children escaped. Some hid in places the soldiers did not find. Others ran into the forests and were not caught. These children would carry the memories of that day for the rest of their lives. By the time help arrived from the settlement, it was over. The ships were lifting off, climbing toward orbit. Parents who had rushed from their homes and workplaces could only watch as the vessels disappeared into the sky, carrying everything that mattered to them. Commander broadcast a message before leaving the system. "People of Elysium IV," his translated voice crackled over every communication channel, "your young will serve the consortium well. Consider this a tax for occupying space that could be put to better use. Do not attempt to pursue us. The Galactic Concord recognizes our commerce rights. Any military action against the consortium will be considered an act of war." He paused, and his tone became almost amused. "We know about your absolute law. We are not impressed. Your threats mean nothing without power to enforce them. Accept your loss and move on. It will be easier for everyone." The message ended. The ships jumped to faster-than-light travel, and on Elysium IV the screaming began. Thomas had been at work when the attack happened. He was a farmer, a simple man who grew vegetables and raised chickens. His daughter Emma was 7 years old, with curly red hair and a laugh that sounded like music. She was in 2nd grade at the school. When Thomas reached the school and found it empty, something broke inside him. He fell to his knees in the playground where Emma had played just hours before. He picked up a toy she had dropped, a small stuffed rabbit she called Mr. Whiskers, and he held it to his chest and wept. Around him, other parents were doing the same thing, crying, screaming, holding each other. Some were trying to contact the colonial government, demanding action. Others were already planning rescue missions, talking about stealing ships and going after the consortium themselves. But Thomas just sat there, holding Mr. Whiskers, staring at the sky where the ships had disappeared. A reporter from the colony's news service approached him. She was crying too, but she was doing her job. "Sir," she said softly, "do you have anything you want to say?" Thomas looked at her. His eyes were red, his face wet with tears, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "They don't know what they've done," he said. "They think we're weak. They think we'll cry and complain and then give up." He shook his head slowly. "They don't understand. They've taken our children. They've taken our children and they expect us to do nothing." He stood up, still holding the rabbit. "When I was a boy," he said, "my grandfather told me a story. He said that humans used to be prey animals millions of years ago. Small, weak creatures that everything else hunted. But we survived and we grew strong, and eventually we became the most dangerous things on our planet. Do you know why?" The reporter shook her head. "Because we protect our young," Thomas said. "Because when something threatened our children, we didn't run, we didn't hide, we killed the threat. We killed it so completely that nothing would ever threaten our children again." He looked up at the sky. "Those aliens took our children. They think they understand what that means. They don't. They can't, but they will learn." 6 hours later, the news reached Earth. 12 hours after that, humanity went silent. Every human ship, every human station, every human world stopped communicating with the rest of the galaxy. Trade routes closed. Diplomatic channels went dark. The constant chatter of a spacefaring civilization simply stopped. The Galactic Concord noticed, but they were not concerned. The humans were probably mourning, they decided, processing their grief. They would calm down eventually, accept the loss, and resume normal activities. The ETH consortium was pleased. The silence seemed like surrender. Neither understood what the silence actually meant. Humanity had stopped talking because there was nothing left to say. Now they were getting ready. Admiral James had served in the Human Defense Force for 40 years. He had commanded ships in border skirmishes, coordinated responses to pirate attacks, and led the fleet during 3 first-contact situations. He thought he understood war. He thought he understood humanity. He was wrong. 3 days after the Elysium raid, he stood in the command center of Earth Central Command and watched something that should have been impossible. On the massive display screens, thousands of dots were moving. Each dot represented a ship. Each ship was human. "This can't be right," he said to his aide. "Our total fleet strength is 300 combat vessels. What am I looking at?" The aide swallowed nervously. "Sir, those are our combat vessels, all of them, plus civilian ships that have been converted. Cargo haulers, passenger liners, mining vessels, exploration craft. They're all being armed and armored." "How many?" "Current count is 4,216, and more are arriving every hour." Stared at the screen. 4,000 ships. The entire human civilian fleet volunteering for military service. It was unprecedented. It was insane. "The crews?" he asked. "Volunteers, sir, all of them. When the call went out, we expected maybe a few thousand people. We've had to turn away millions." The aide paused. "Sir, we have 90-year-old veterans demanding to serve. We have teenagers lying about their age. We have pacifists who have never touched a weapon in their lives asking for combat positions. And the factories? Running at full capacity. Every manufacturing facility on Earth and the colonies has switched to military production. We're building weapons, armor, missiles, fighters. Consumer goods production has essentially stopped. No one is complaining." Closed his eyes. He had studied history. He knew what total mobilization looked like, when an entire civilization put aside everything else and focused on a single goal. He had read about it in textbooks. He had never thought he would see it happen. "What are our orders from the government?" he asked. "Recover the children by any means necessary." The aide hesitated. "Sir, there's more. The government has issued a formal declaration." "What kind of declaration?" "The ETH Consortium has been declared a species-level threat. All members of the consortium are to be considered hostile. No surrender will be accepted. No prisoners will be taken unless necessary for intelligence. The goal is not victory, sir. The goal is extinction." Felt a chill run down his spine. He had served his entire life to protect humanity. He had always believed in proportional response, in the rules of war, in the possibility of peace even with enemies. Now his government was ordering genocide. And God help him, he understood why. "The conquered?" he asked. "Ambassador is addressing them now, sir. She's informing them that we're invoking our absolute law. She's also warning them to stay out of our way." "And if they don't?" The aide didn't answer. He didn't need to. In the Galactic Conquered chamber, Ambassador stood at the speaking platform once again. She was older now, 73 years old, her hair completely gray, her face lined with age. But her voice was just as steady as it had been 60 years ago. "The ETH Consortium has taken 283 human children from the colony on Elysium Ivy," she said. "This is a violation of humanity's absolute law. We are responding accordingly." High Arbiter has clicked his mandibles. "Ambassador, the conquered urges restraint. The consortium is a member state. Their actions, while regrettable, fall within the bounds of—" "The consortium is not a member state," interrupted. "The consortium is dead. They simply don't know it yet." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Has raised a claw for silence. "Ambassador, surely there can be negotiation. The consortium may be willing to return the children in exchange for—" "There will be no negotiation." "Then perhaps a limited military response, a punitive expedition to recover the children and extract reparations." "There will be no limited response. There will be no reparations. There will be no punishment followed by normal relations." His voice was flat, empty of emotion. "The consortium took our children. The consortium will cease to exist. Every ship, every station, every world, every soldier, every leader, every collaborator, they will all be destroyed." "This is madness," one of the delegates chimed. "You speak of annihilating an entire civilization. The conquered will not permit." "The conquered will not interfere." His tone did not change. "This is not a request. This is an information. Any vessel from any species that attempts to prevent us from reaching our children will be treated as a consortium ally. Any vessel that attempts to protect the consortium will be destroyed. Any world that harbors consortium refugees will be considered a legitimate target. You threaten the entire conquered, has demanded. I threaten anyone who stands between humanity and its children, anyone at all. Looked around the chamber. 60 years ago, I stood in this room and gave you a warning. You laughed. The consortium laughed. They thought we were weak. They thought we were sentimental. They thought our love for our children was a vulnerability. She paused, and for the first time, emotion crept into her voice. They were wrong. Our love for our children is not a weakness. It is the most terrifying force in the universe. It is the thing that makes us human. And now the consortium is going to learn what that means. She turned to leave. Ambassador has called. The conquered cannot allow. Stopped, she turned back. And for a moment her mask slipped, and Has saw something in her eyes that made his ancient heart stutter. You cannot stop us, she said quietly. No one can stop us. Not you, not the conquered, not every fleet in the galaxy combined. You wanted to know what humanity's absolute law meant. Now you will see. And when it's over, you will remember. You will tell your children and your children's children for 1,000 generations. You will tell them what happened to the species that took human children. You will tell them and you will warn them, and maybe, they will be wise enough to listen. She walked out of the chamber. Behind her, the assembly erupted in chaos, but it didn't matter. Nothing they said or did would change anything. 3 weeks later, the human fleet entered consortium space. The ETH had been preparing their defenses. They had recalled their forces from across the galaxy. They had fortified their border systems with mines and weapons platforms. They had gathered their fleet, 700 combat vessels, the largest military force in that region of the galaxy. They were confident. They outnumbered the humans significantly, and they were fighting on their own territory. The human fleet arrived with over 4,000 ships. The first battle lasted 6 hours. The ETH fought with skill and courage, but they could not stop the tide. Human vessels swarmed over their positions. Human crews fought with a ferocity that the consortium had never encountered. When consortium ships tried to surrender, the humans ignored them. When consortium captains broadcast pleas for mercy, the humans did not respond. The only message the human fleet broadcast, over and over on all frequencies, was a single question. Where are the children? Commander watched the battle reports with growing horror. This was not how war was supposed to work. There were supposed to be negotiations, pauses for regrouping, opportunities for strategic withdrawal. The humans gave none of these. They just kept coming. And they kept asking the same question. Where are the children? The ETH consortium had existed for 3,000 years. They had built their empire slowly and carefully, conquering weak species, enslaving populations, selling flesh across the galaxy. They had fought wars against powerful enemies and survived. They had faced extinction before and found ways to endure. None of that mattered now. Commander stood in the command center of his flagship and watched his empire burn. The holographic display showed system after system falling to the human advance. Blue dots representing consortium forces winked out one by one. Red dots representing human ships spread across the map like a disease. How is this possible? He demanded. They are supposed to be weak. Their technology is inferior. Their numbers were supposed to be small. His second officer answered in a voice hollow with shock. They are not fighting like a military force, Commander. They are fighting like animals. Their ships do not retreat when damaged. Their crews do not surrender when boarded. They continue attacking until their vessels are completely destroyed. That is suicide. Yes, Commander, but for every one of their ships we destroy, they destroy 3 of ours. And they have more ships than we thought possible. They converted their entire civilian fleet. They built new vessels in weeks. They are throwing everything they have at us. Claws scraped against the console. Contact their fleet, offer to negotiate, tell them we will return the children. We have tried, Commander. They do not respond to any communication except. Except what? The officer hesitated. Except the question, where are the children? That is all they say, over and over. They do not acknowledge anything else. Then tell them where the children are. Give them coordinates. Commander, the officer's voice dropped. The children are on the. If we give them that information, the humans will go directly there. There will be nothing between them and the heart of our empire. Understood the problem. The children were valuable. They were on the because that was where the slave markets were, where the processing facilities operated. Giving the humans that information would mean giving up the children. It would also mean admitting defeat. But what was the alternative? Send the message, he ordered. Tell them the children are on Eth Prime. Tell them they can have them back. Tell them we surrender. The message was sent. For 3 hours there was no response. Then, finally, a human voice came through the communication system. It was Admiral, his tone as cold as space itself. We acknowledge your message. We will recover the children. However, your surrender is not accepted. What? Leaned forward. You have what you want. We are giving you the children. What more do you demand? We do not demand anything. We do not negotiate. We do not accept surrender. You took human children. You harmed human children. The consequences were made clear 60 years ago. Now those consequences will be carried out. This is madness. The children will be returned. We can pay reparations. We can. You can die, said. That is all you can do. The communication ended. The human fleet did not slow down. They did not stop to accept surrenders. They moved through consortium space like fire through dry grass, destroying everything in their path. On the consortium, the children were held in a processing facility. It was a large building near the capital city, designed to prepare new slaves for sale. The children had been there for 5 weeks. They had been examined and sorted by age and health. Some of the older ones had begun the breaking process, the psychological conditioning that made slaves obedient. When the human ground forces arrived, they hit the facility like a thunderbolt. Drop ships crashed through the building's defenses. Soldiers in heavy armor poured out, weapons blazing. The consortium guards fought back, but they were overwhelmed in minutes. Sergeant Lisa was the first human to reach the children. She burst through a locked door and found herself in a large room filled with sleeping pods. Inside each pod was a human child, unconscious, hooked up to machines that monitored their vital signs. For a moment could not move. She had been a soldier for 15 years. She had seen combat. She had seen death. But nothing had prepared her for this, row after row of human children, stolen from their homes, treated like products. She reached out and touched the nearest pod. Inside was a little girl with curly red hair. A tag on the pod identified her as Unit 147, female, age 7, premium grade. Found them, said into her communicator. Her voice cracked. I found the children. They're alive. They're all alive. The response came back immediately. Confirmed. Medical teams are en route. Secure the facility. Protect those children at all costs. Yes, sir. Wiped her eyes and turned to her squad. You heard the Admiral. Nothing gets near these kids. Nothing. For the next 6 hours, human forces held the facility against waves of consortium counterattacks. The ETH threw everything they had at the building, trying to recapture their valuable cargo or destroy it rather than let it be recovered. They failed. Every attack was beaten back. Every soldier who approached was killed. The humans fought with a fury that the consortium had never encountered, a fury born not from hatred but from love. When the medical teams finally arrived, they found 283 children alive and recovering. Some were traumatized. Some had injuries from the processing procedures. All of them would need therapy and care. But they were alive. They were going home. The rescue of the children did not end the war. Commander had assumed that once the humans recovered their young, they would stop. They would go home, satisfied with their victory. That was how war worked. You achieved your objective and then you negotiated peace. Humans did not stop. They continued through consortium space, destroying military bases, shipyards, communications networks. They hunted down consortium vessels wherever they fled. They attacked colonies that had supported the slave trade. They systematically dismantled everything the ETH had built over 3,000 years. Tried to escape. He abandoned his flagship and fled to a remote outpost, hopping to hide until the humans lost interest. They found him anyway. The human special forces team that captured him was led by a woman named Captain Sarah. Her father had been a teacher at the Elysium Ivy School. He had died fighting to protect the children. Was brought before a human tribunal on a space station that had once belonged to the consortium. The trial lasted 3 days. Evidence was presented, recordings of the raid, documents showing orders, testimonies from survivors. When the verdict came, it was guilty. When the sentence came, it was death. Before his execution, was allowed to make a final statement. He looked at the humans who had destroyed everything he had built, and he asked a question that had haunted him since the war began. "Why?" he said. "We have taken slaves from dozens of species. We have raided colonies, stolen children, sold people across the galaxy. No one has ever responded like this. Why are you different? What makes human children so valuable that you would destroy an entire civilization to save them?" Admiral answered him. "You don't understand the question you're asking," he said. "You see children as products, as resources, as things to be bought and sold. You calculate their value based on what they can produce, what they can be used for. We don't see children that way. We see them as everything. Every child is a universe of possibility. Every child represents hope and love and a future we can barely imagine. When you took those children, you didn't just steal property. You reached into our hearts and tore out the thing we love most." He paused. "There is no price we would not pay to protect that. No distance we would not travel. No enemy we would not destroy. You asked us to calculate the value of our children against the cost of war. We cannot make that calculation. We will never make that calculation. Because to us, our children are beyond value." Was executed the next day. The destruction of the ETH consortium continued for another 3 months. When it was over, nothing remained. No fleet, no government, no civilization. The ETH species survived. The humans did not exterminate civilians who had not participated in the slave trade, but their power was gone forever. The galaxy watched in silence. And the galaxy remembered. 1 year after the destruction of the ETH consortium, Ambassador returned to the Galactic Concord Assembly. She was 74 years old now, and she moved more slowly than before. The past year had taken its toll on her, as it had taken its toll on all of humanity. But her eyes were still clear, and her voice was still strong. The assembly chamber was different than she remembered. Oh, the crystal walls were the same, and the ancient stars still burned outside the viewports. But the beings who filled the chamber looked at her differently now. Where there had once been amusement and condescension, she now saw something else. Fear. High Arbiter Has was waiting at the speaking platform. He looked older too. Even his ancient carapace seemed more worn, more tired. The war had not touched the hegemony directly, but watching it had affected everyone. "Ambassador," he said formally, "the Conquered welcomes humanity back to full diplomatic standing. We wish to discuss the events of the past year." Nodded and took her place at the platform. She looked around at the assembled representatives, 400 species, thousands of individuals, all of them watching her with careful attention. "Ask your questions," she said. Has clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. The conquered has concerns about humanity's actions. The complete destruction of a member state's military, government, and economic infrastructure. This is unprecedented. Some members feel that humanity has violated the principles of proportional response. The consortium took our children, said simply. Our response was proportional to that crime. With respect, Ambassador, the proportional response to kidnapping would be rescue and reparations. You destroyed an entire civilization. Yes, this seems excessive. Was quiet for a moment. Then she did something she had not done in 60 years of diplomatic service. She stepped away from the speaking platform and walked toward the assembly seats. She moved slowly, looking at each representative as she passed. May I tell you a story? She asked. Has gestured his permission, clearly confused by this departure from protocol. Millions of years ago, began, humans were prey animals. We were small, weak creatures living in a dangerous world. Everything hunted us. We had no claws, no fangs, no armor. By every logical measure, we should have gone extinct. She stopped in front of a delegate, the crystalline being chimed nervously. But we survived. Do you know why? Because we learned to cooperate. We learned to protect each other. And most importantly, we learned to protect our children. She moved on, passing a cluster of representatives. You see, every species protects its young to some degree. It is biological necessity. But humans developed something beyond mere instinct. We developed love. Not love as a calculation of genetic benefit, but love as an absolute value. Love that does not ask questions, does not count costs, does not accept limits. She stopped in front of Has himself. When a human child is threatened, something happens in our minds. The part of us that calculates risk and benefit simply shuts off. The part of us that considers consequences goes silent. All that remains is a single, absolute imperative. Protect the child. Save the child. Kill anything that threatens the child. Has leaned back slightly. That sounds irrational. It is completely irrational, agreed. It is also what made us human. It is what allowed us to survive and grow and spread across our world and eventually into space. Our love for our children is not a weakness to be exploited. It is the engine that drives our entire species. She turned and walked back to the speaking platform. 60 years ago, I stood here and gave you a warning. I told you that humanity's absolute law was the protection of our children. I told you that anyone who harmed our children would face total consequences. You laughed. You thought we were being sentimental. You thought we were making threats we could not back up. She paused. The consortium made the same mistake. They calculated the costs and benefits. They looked at our fleet strength, our technology, our resources. They decided that we were too weak to be a threat. They were wrong. What they failed to understand, what you all failed to understand, is that when our children are threatened, we do not calculate. We do not negotiate. We do not stop. We become something else, something ancient and terrible and absolutely unstoppable. She looked around the chamber one more time. The consortium took 283 human children. In response, humanity mobilized 4,000 ships, millions of soldiers, and the entire economic output of our civilization. We fought for 8 months without pause. We suffered terrible losses. We did things that will haunt us for generations. And we did not hesitate for a single moment, because those were our children. Not just the children of the parents on Elysium IV. Our children. Every human child is the child of every human adult. We are all parents and we are all responsible and we will all fight. She straightened her shoulders. So when you ask why our response was so extreme, I will tell you the truth. By your standards, it was extreme. By any rational measure, it was excessive. But we are not rational when it comes to our children. We cannot be rational. The very thing that makes us human prevents it. Has was silent for a long moment. Then he asked the question that everyone in the chamber was thinking. If another species were to make the same mistake as the consortium, would humanity respond the same way? Yes, even if that species were more powerful, even if the cost to humanity would be total destruction. Did not hesitate. Yes, we would fight until the last human being was dead. We would burn everything we have built. We would sacrifice our entire species, because a universe where our children can be taken and harmed without consequence is not a universe we want to exist in. That is madness, a delegate chimed. That is humanity, replied. We warned you. We always warn you. We give every species a chance to understand what we are and what we will do. We hope that the warning is enough. We hope that no one will test us. She looked at the... But when someone does test us, we do not bluff. We do not exaggerate. We do exactly what we promised. And then we come back here to this chamber and we remind everyone what happened, so that the next time someone thinks about harming a human child, they will remember the consortium. They will remember what happened to them. And maybe, they will choose differently. She began to walk toward the exit. Wait, has called. Is there nothing that would stop you? No negotiation, no offer, no. Stopped at the doorway and looked back. There is one thing that would stop us, she said. Do not harm our children. Do not take them, do not hurt them, do not threaten them. Treat them with the same care you would want others to treat your own young. That is all we ask. That is all we have ever asked. Show kindness to the children of humanity, and we will be the best friends you have ever had. We will trade with you, explore with you, build with you, and stand beside you against any threat. But harm one hair on one child's head, and we will become the last thing you ever see. She turned to leave, then paused one final time. You were warned, she said. Now you have seen what the warning means. Remember it, teach it to your children, write it in your histories and carve it into your monuments, and never ever forget. She walked out of the chamber. Behind her, 400 species sat in stunned silence. And in the centuries that followed, they remembered. The story of the consortium spread across the galaxy, passed down from generation to generation. It became legend, then myth, then something close to religious truth. Never touch the humans young. They warned us. They always warn us. And they always keep their promise. On Elysium IV, 20 years after the raid, a memorial stood on the hill where the school had once been. It bore the names of the 11 teachers who had died protecting their students. At its base, fresh flowers were laid every day. Among the regular visitors was a woman with curly red hair and a stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. Emma had grown up to become a teacher herself, working with children who had experienced trauma. She never forgot what had happened to her, and she never forgot the people who had saved her. Sometimes she brought her own daughter to see the memorial. The little girl was 5 years old, with her mother's red hair and her grandfather's stubborn chin. Why do we come here, Mommy? The girl asked once. Emma knelt down and held her daughter close. Because we have to remember, she said. We have to remember the people who protected us, and we have to remember what our family, our big, wonderful human family, did to bring us home. Is that why everyone loves children so much? Because they'll fight for us. Emma smiled and kissed her daughter's forehead. That's exactly right, sweetheart. That's exactly right. And somewhere out in the galaxy, on 1,000 different worlds, other species were telling their children the same story. The story of the humans and their young. The story of the warning that was given and the warning that was ignored. The story of the species that loved its children so much that it burned an empire to save them. They warned us. They always warn us. And they always keep their promise.